Have you ever looked at a photo of yourself and felt a rush of discomfort? Not just disappointment in how your hair turned out or how your smile looked, but a strange sense that something deeper was off, like the photo didn't just capture your appearance, it exposed something you'd rather not see, something you didn't know you were hiding. That moment when your own image confronts you like a stranger, that's where the truth lives, not in the pixels but in your reaction. And Carl Jung would tell you, it's not the camera that's the problem, it's the shadow. You see, most people think bad photos are technical failures, bad lighting, a bad angle, maybe even a bad day. But what if it goes deeper? What if your discomfort isn't about how you look, but about what the photo reflects back about your inner world? Because here's the hard truth. The reason you hate how you look in photos has less to do with your features and more to do with your fears, your wounds, your unconscious. The parts of you that you've shoved into the dark. What Jung called the shadow. The shadow isn't just about repressed anger or shame. It includes everything you've ever been told is unacceptable. Your vulnerability, your insecurity, your need to be seen. And photographs, especially the ones you hate, are like mirrors, not of the body, but of the soul. Think about it. A photo freezes a moment of you. But unlike the mirror you control, the photo tells no lies. You can't suck in your stomach. You can't adjust the lighting. You can't look away. It's there, staring back. And what do you really see? Maybe your smile looks forced. Maybe your eyes look distant. Maybe you look awkward, uncomfortable, like you're wearing your skin but not really in it. That's not a coincidence. That's not just how you look. That's your unconscious showing through. Carl Jung believed that the unconscious isn't passive, it's active. It speaks through symbols, dreams, body language, and yes, even photographs. So when you see yourself in an image and feel something heavy, confusing, or painful, it's not vanity, it's a psychological message. Look closer. The slouched posture might reveal more than bad body alignment. It could point to old beliefs. I'm not good enough. I take up too much space. Or I need to shrink to be loved. The lack of eye contact, maybe that's shame, or fear, or an old habit of emotionally hiding when you feel exposed. What we think is bad lighting is often bad self-perception, and the parts of us that react most strongly are the ones we've disowned, the pieces we've cast into the shadow. Here's the twist. The more you resist your own image, the more disconnected you are from your authenticity. You start to perform. You smile not because you feel joy, but because you're afraid of looking sad. You pose not because you feel powerful, but because you fear being invisible. And over time, these emotional contortions, the fake smiles, the tension in the eyes, the subtle self-abandonment, they build up. They get stored in the body, in the muscles of your face, in your posture, in your energy, until one day, the camera captures them all. That's what you're really seeing, not your physical form, but your psychological armor. The camera doesn't care about your excuses. It doesn't lie to protect your ego. It captures the truth. And if you've spent years hiding your emotions, swallowing your truth, or shrinking to make others comfortable, the camera will see that. It will show that. And it will confront you with the one thing you've spent your whole life avoiding: yourself. Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That includes how you see yourself. And more importantly, how you don't. So next time you see a photo that unsettles you, ask this: what part of me am I rejecting in this image? What emotional truth is this photo mirroring back that I've been unwilling to accept? Because that discomfort is gold. It's a psychological portal, a sacred mirror. And if you're brave enough to sit with it, not judge it, not edit it, not explain it away, but really sit with it, It can show you the exact part of your shadow you're ready to reclaim. Your eyes in the photo might look dead, not because you are, but because you've been hiding. Your mouth might look strained, not because it's crooked, but because you haven't spoken your truth in years. Your posture might be slumped, not because you're lazy, but because you've been carrying the weight of emotional battles no one ever saw. This is the power of symbolic self-perception. Every unflattering photo is a map, and the destination is you. Most people will tell you to just take better pictures, to smile more, to pose better. But you don't need to fix your image, you need to meet your image. To stop flinching when your soul shows through. To look your own discomfort in the eye and say, I see you, I'm listening. Because underneath that bad photo is a part of you that's been screaming for acknowledgement. A younger self, a scared self, a self you buried to survive. And when you finally make eye contact with that version of you, even in a photograph, you don't just reclaim your image, you reclaim your power. That's the spiritual meaning of why you look bad in photos. It's not a punishment, it's not a flaw, it's an invitation. One that says, you're ready to stop hiding, you're ready to integrate, you're ready to become whole. And the next time you see yourself through the lens, you'll see more than skin and bone. You'll see someone who is no longer ashamed of their shadow, someone who doesn't need to perform for love, someone who can finally say with every inch of their being, this is me, and I am enough. There's something deeply sacred about seeing yourself without filters, without the tension of pretending, without the strain of wanting to be liked. It's raw, it's vulnerable, but it's also the birthplace of real transformation, because you can't heal what you won't see, and photographs, especially the ones you want to delete immediately, are one of the most overlooked tools for self-awareness. They don't care about your intentions, they reflect your being, your presence, your truth. That's why the same image that makes you cringe today might speak differently to you in 5 years, not because the image changed, but because you did. Your perception isn't fixed. It evolves with your consciousness, and the deeper you go into your shadow work, the more you confront your repressed fears, insecurities, and survival strategies, the more neutral your image becomes. You stop reacting to your face like it's an enemy. You start recognizing it as a symbol, an imprint of your current relationship with yourself. Because here's the truth, Jung understood better than anyone. How you see yourself is not about mirrors, and it's not about cameras, it's about consciousness. The more fragmented you are inside, the more fragmented you'll appear on the outside. The more ashamed you are of your own story, the more tension your body will hold, the more disconnected you are from your emotional truth, the more lifeless your image becomes. And none of this is a punishment, it's a message. The self we perform is never the self we see. We try so hard to present the best version of ourselves to the world, but the camera, in its brutal honesty, captures what we can't mask, the contradiction between who we are and who we pretend to be. The moment the shutter clicks, it freezes that contradiction in time. And if we're not ready to face it, we label the photo as bad. But it's not bad. It's revealing, and the real question isn't, why do I look like that? It's, what is this trying to show me? Jung taught that the unconscious communicates in symbols. A photo is a symbol, a frozen message from your psyche to your awareness. And your reaction to that message, whether it's embarrassment, shame, disgust, or grief, is a direct signal of what your shadow is ready to reveal. Maybe it's the part of you that's tired of pretending. Maybe it's the younger version of you who was never allowed to be fully seen. Maybe it's the deep exhaustion of constantly monitoring your appearance, your behavior, your emotions, that haunting feeling of being watched, judged, sized up, even when you're just trying to be yourself. That's not about a camera. That's about survival patterns you've internalized, and every time you reject a photo of yourself, you're not just rejecting an image, you're rejecting the story behind it. This is why healing your self-picture isn't about learning to pose better. It's about healing the relationship between your conscious and unconscious selves. When your conscious self accepts what your unconscious is showing, integration begins. And that's when your image starts to feel softer, warmer, more grounded. Not because your face changed, but because your relationship to your truth changed. You no longer see yourself as an object to be edited. You see yourself as a soul with a story, a presence with depth, a being worthy of being seen, not for perfection, but for authenticity. And let's not forget one of the most overlooked aspects of how you appear in photos: energy. You can't Photoshop energy. You can't fake presence. You either bring it or you don't. And the truth is, most people live emotionally fragmented lives. They show up physically, but not energetically. They smile with their mouths, but cry with their eyes. They stand tall, but you can see the weight in their shoulders. They pose confidently, but you can feel their fear. That's what photographs capture. Not just how you look, but how you feel. And often, the feeling behind the photo is what makes it so hard to look at. You remember the anxiety you felt before the photo was taken, the tension in your stomach, the fear of not being enough, the need to be perfect. And when you see the image, all that emotional residue floods back. That's the imprint. That's the signature of the unconscious. That's what Jung wanted us to see. Not the face we wear, but the energy we emit. Because energy never lies, and neither does the unconscious. This is where the deeper spiritual truth begins to unfold. Every unflattering photo is a visual echo of a psychological reality. You think you're reacting to a nose that looks too big, or a smile that feels awkward, or a body that doesn't look right, but you're not. You're reacting to the emotional frequency that's embedded in that moment. You're reacting to the version of yourself that doesn't feel safe to exist, the part of you that's still carrying shame, guilt, fear, or unworthiness. That's the part that shows up in the photo. That's the part that the camera, without judgment or mercy, makes visible. And when you learn to face that part with compassion instead of criticism, the image changes, not literally but symbolically. You stop seeing it as evidence of your flaws. You start seeing it as an invitation to heal, to integrate, to love the parts of you that have been hiding behind tension and performance. That's what shadow work is all about, and that's what makes this work so transformative. You don't change by fixing your appearance. You change by meeting your resistance, by getting curious about the part of you that flinches when you see yourself, by asking, whose voice is that in my head telling me I'm not enough? When did I start believing that my real face wasn't worthy of being seen? What would it mean to look at myself and feel peace instead of panic? These are not small questions. They're initiations. Because the journey to self-acceptance doesn't start with a better mirror or a better selfie. It starts with courage. The courage to face yourself, not just as you wish to be, but as you are. With all the contradictions, all the shadows, all the parts you've buried and denied. And yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it's raw. But it's also liberating. Because once you stop fighting your image, you stop fighting your truth. And in that space, something beautiful happens. You begin to reclaim the parts of you that have been waiting in the shadows. You begin to show up, not just for the photo, but for your life. When you stop rejecting the face you see, something profound begins to shift, not just in how you perceive your reflection, but in how you carry yourself through the world. You start to notice subtle changes, the way your shoulders sit a little higher, the way your eyes begin to hold contact instead of darting away, the way your smile no longer feels like a performance but an organic expression of your inner alignment. These aren't cosmetic changes, they're energetic recalibrations, because when you make peace with your image, you make peace with your presence. And presence is everything. It's what people feel before they ever hear your voice. It's what lingers in the air long after you've left a room. And most importantly, it's what the camera captures when the mask finally comes off. Think of the people whose photos you admire, not for their beauty, but for their aliveness. The ones whose eyes seem to tell a story, the ones whose energy leaps off the screen. What you're seeing isn't perfection. You're seeing authenticity. You're witnessing someone who isn't at war with themselves, someone who has accepted their emotional truth, integrated their contradictions, and brought all of themselves to that moment. That's what creates presence, and that's what gives an image its soul. Carl Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires us to integrate the shadow. But what does that mean in practical terms? It means no longer hiding the parts of you that feel unworthy. It means facing the grief, the rage, the vulnerability, and the confusion that you've tried to outgrow or silence. It means recognizing that every part of you, especially the parts that make you cringe, hold essential truths about who you are and what you need. And when you begin that integration, your relationship to imagery transforms. You no longer need to curate your face to feel safe. You no longer panic when someone takes a candid shot. You no longer scan the image for flaws or beg the light to make you look less human, because you no longer need to be seen as perfect. You need to be seen as real. That's the shift. That's the alchemy. And it doesn't just change how you feel in front of a lens. It changes your entire approach to life. You stop chasing validation. You stop adjusting your identity to earn love. You stop abandoning yourself in an attempt to control how others perceive you. You begin to live as if your truth matters more than your image. And paradoxically, that's when you become magnetic, because people aren't drawn to perfection. They're drawn to authenticity, to the courage it takes to be unfiltered, to the grounded energy of someone who has stopped hiding. But let's be honest. Getting to that point is not easy. It requires deep work, honest reflection, and the willingness to sit in emotional discomfort without numbing, avoiding, or editing. It asks you to revisit the moments that shaped your self-image, the childhood criticisms, the societal standards, the betrayals that taught you to mask your pain. It asks you to look at those old stories and ask, is this really mine? Or was it something I inherited from a culture that feared emotional honesty? Because once you start unraveling the layers, you see how much of your image anxiety was never yours to carry. It was passed down, projected, imposed, and now you have the chance to put it down. One of the most powerful exercises in this process is not to avoid unflattering photos, but to sit with them, to look into the eyes of your own discomfort and ask, what are you trying to tell me? Because the eyes don't just reflect light, they reflect consciousness. And every photo that unsettles you is a direct invitation to reclaim a part of your psyche that's been exiled. Maybe it's the insecure teenager who never felt attractive. Maybe it's the inner child who was mocked or overlooked. Maybe it's the version of you who has never been allowed to fully exist without performance. And when you look at that photo with compassion instead of criticism, you begin to reparent those parts. You begin to offer them the acceptance they've always craved. And that is the moment the photo transforms, not on the outside, but in your soul. This is why Jung's work is so revolutionary, because it gives you the tools to decode your inner world through the symbols that appear in everyday life. A photograph, once seen as a source of shame, becomes a sacred mirror. A chance to meet your shadow not as an enemy, but as a guide. And the more you practice this, the more liberated you become. You stop needing every image to be perfect. You stop fearing the camera. You stop wasting energy managing your persona, because you've made contact with something far more powerful than image, essence. And the deeper truth is this: when you begin to see your image with love, the world begins to see you differently too. Not because they've changed, but because your energy has. You no longer walk into a room needing approval. You bring presence. You no longer shrink to fit someone else's frame. You own your space. And that shift, though invisible, changes everything. It changes the way people respond to you. It changes the kind of relationships you attract. It changes the way you show up for yourself. And that change is not surface level, it is structural, it is spiritual, it is transformative. So let this be your permission, not to curate a better version of yourself, but to meet the version that already exists, fully, vulnerably, unapologetically. Let the camera become your mirror. Let your discomfort become your compass, and let your image, no matter how imperfect it seems, become the place where your shadow meets the light. Because in the end, the goal is not to look better, it's to see clearer, to stop flinching at your own reflection, to stop needing every angle to be flattering, and to start seeing every image, even the messy, awkward, tear-stained ones, as sacred evidence that you are alive, evolving, and becoming more whole with every step. There comes a moment in your healing where you stop asking how to appear better and start asking how to be more honest. That moment, quiet, subtle, but monumental, is the beginning of psychological liberation. Because the desire to always look good, whether in pictures or in life, is a symptom of deeper fragmentation, it reveals an inner split between the self you truly are and the self you've been conditioned to present. And until that split is acknowledged, you'll keep reacting to your own reflection like it's a threat. That visceral discomfort you feel when you see a candid shot, or when someone tags you in a photo you didn't curate, is your soul saying, "I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of being distorted just to be accepted, and it's time to listen." Carl Jung's entire philosophy revolves around the integration of opposites, the light and the shadow, the persona and the authentic self. He believed that the psyche yearns for wholeness, and the more you suppress parts of yourself to maintain a socially approved image, the more those parts will rebel. Sometimes quietly, sometimes violently, often symbolically. Like in your photographs, the very discomfort that makes you want to delete the image is the signpost pointing toward your next level of growth. Not in your appearance, but in your acceptance. Not in the surface, but in the soul. Because the path to wholeness doesn't move through perfection, it moves through presence. And presence only happens when you're no longer afraid of what you see. Think of the way children look at themselves before the world teaches them to be ashamed. Their gaze is pure, unfiltered, curious. They don't yet carry the projections of a culture obsessed with flawlessness. They don't look at a photo and think, "My nose looks wrong," or "I look fat," or "I need to pose differently." They just see themselves. And then, slowly, painfully, they begin to learn the rules. They begin to internalize the voices that dissect their bodies, police their emotions, and equate image with value. And piece by piece, the shadow grows. It grows with every moment they feel too much, too loud, too emotional, too awkward. It grows with every time they're told to smile when they feel sad, to stay quiet when they want to scream, to sit still when their soul wants to dance. And eventually, they learn that the world doesn't want to see the truth, it wants to see the mask. But the mask always cracks, and when it does, it shows up in ways you don't expect. In the eyes that look empty even when you're smiling, in the body that holds tension even when you're trying to relax, in the image that looks off even when all the technical elements are right. That's the shadow breaking through. That's the unconscious saying, "Enough." And that's where the work begins, not in retaking the photo, not in changing the angle, but in turning inward and asking, what part of me have I not yet made peace with? The truth is, you cannot Photoshop your way to self-love, you cannot filter your way to wholeness, and you cannot perform your way into presence. Presence is a byproduct of integration. It's what radiates from a person who has stopped fighting themselves, who no longer views their image as an enemy but as a map of every wound they've healed, every fear they've faced, every piece of their soul they've reclaimed. That kind of presence is undeniable. It doesn't need to be loud, it doesn't need to be perfect, it simply is, and when it's captured in a photo, you feel it instantly. That's the kind of self-perception Jung was pointing toward, Not one that's based on external metrics, but one that emerges from deep psychological truths. He knew that until we reclaim our shadow, we will keep projecting it onto others, onto situations, and yes, even onto our own faces. Because the shadow isn't just emotional, it's energetic. It affects how we inhabit our body, how we express ourselves, and how we perceive. And the only way to change the image is to change the relationship. Not the one you have with your face, the one you have with yourself. And the irony is, once you stop trying to control your image, you actually become more radiant, not in a superficial sense, but in an energetic one. Your features may stay the same, your angles may not change, but the way you inhabit your own skin becomes magnetic. Because confidence isn't about thinking you look good, it's about no longer needing to look good to feel worthy. It's about being so grounded in your authenticity that you no longer shrink under scrutiny. You no longer contort to be accepted. You show up fully, freely, fiercely, and that energy, the energy of someone who has nothing to hide, is what people feel in the image. So what does all this mean practically? It means that every time you feel triggered by a photo, you have a choice. You can reject it, delete it, shame yourself. Or you can pause, breathe, and get curious. You can look at that image and ask, what emotion am I really feeling? What memory is this bringing up? What part of me is asking to be seen? Because that's where the transformation lives. Not in the image, but in the inquiry. Not in the aesthetics, but in the awareness. And eventually you'll reach a point where you stop needing the photo to be beautiful, because you've made peace with being real. You'll start seeing the lines in your face as evidence of your laughter and grief. You'll start seeing the weariness in your eyes as a sign of how much you've survived. You'll stop needing to smile when you don't feel like it. You'll stop needing to angle your face to hide the features you were taught to hate. You'll look at yourself, and you'll see not a flaw, but a human. A whole, complex, messy, powerful human who is no longer defined by angles or lighting or filters. A human who is finally, unapologetically, home. And that is the essence of Jungian shadow work. Not abstract theory, not esoteric jargon, but the raw, embodied practice of meeting yourself where you are, in the moments that trigger you, in the images that unsettle you, in the reflections that ask more questions than they answer. Because that's where your soul is speaking, and if you're brave enough to listen, to really listen, you'll hear something extraordinary. You'll hear the parts of you that have been waiting not to be fixed, but to be felt, to be seen, to be loved. And what happens when you start listening to those parts? When you stop shaming yourself for the wrinkles, the awkwardness, the sadness caught in your eyes, something unexpected occurs. You soften, not in weakness but in truth. You stop flinching every time a photo catches you off guard. You stop bracing for impact when you see your own face. You begin to understand that healing your self-image was never about looking better. It was about feeling safer in your own skin. You realize that every picture you once hated was never really about your face. It was about the emotion it froze, the mask it revealed, the unhealed memory it mirrored. And once you see that clearly, it's impossible to unsee. Every image becomes a clue, a message, a window into a part of you that's been asking, sometimes begging, to be integrated. Carl Jung believed that the unconscious reveals itself in images, symbols, and emotional reactions. And in many ways, photography is a form of modern-day myth-making. We freeze ourselves in time, create visual narratives, share curated identities, but we rarely ask what these images are saying about our actual psychological state. A smile can be armor, a pose can be performance. A glance away from the lens can be the loudest cry for help. And most of us scroll past these signs in ourselves without even noticing. But once you slow down and begin to read the symbolism, your posture, your tension, your eyes, everything begins to change. You start seeing not just a photo, but a story. And that story isn't there to punish you, it's there to wake you up. Because the truth is, you cannot integrate what you will not confront. And your reaction to your image, if you're willing to stop numbing it, deleting it, editing it, becomes your mirror. It shows you exactly where you still feel unseen, unworthy, or unsafe. It reveals the characters you still play, the roles you still perform, the scripts you've outgrown but continue repeating. Maybe the smile you always wear was inherited from a childhood where you had to appear happy to keep the peace. Maybe the stiffness in your shoulders is the residue of always bracing for rejection. Maybe the hollow look in your eyes is what happens when you've been looking for yourself in others for so long you forgot how to see you. These aren't flaws. They are traces of survival, emotional scar tissue, evidence of the parts of you that did whatever it took to keep going when no one else noticed the cost. And this is where transformation begins, not in deleting the old photos, but in facing them with compassion, in holding space for the younger version of you who didn't yet know how to show up without a mask, in honoring the version of you who did the best they could with the tools they had. And in doing so, you reclaim the energy you've been leaking into perfectionism, image management, and self-judgment. You begin to redirect that energy toward authenticity, presence, and truth. And the deeper you go into that truth, the more natural your presence becomes. You stop trying to control how others see you because you're no longer confused about who you are. And ironically, that's when people start to really see you. Because you've stopped hiding, your energy becomes cleaner, your nervous system calmer, your face more alive, not because you've changed it, but because you returned to it. You've come back into your body, you've stopped performing for approval and started living from alignment. And the camera, which once felt like an executioner, becomes a witness. It captures your wholeness, not just your angles, not just your aesthetic, but your being. That's the real gift of shadow work. It takes what once felt unbearable, your reflection, your awkwardness, your emotional residue, and transforms it into your strength. Because now, instead of fearing being seen, you realize that what you feared wasn't visibility, it was rejection. It was the memory of the first time someone looked at you with disappointment. The first time you were told to change, to be smaller, to be less sensitive, less strange, more palatable. And that wound got stored not just in your psyche, but in your face, your posture, your smile, your gaze. And every time you looked at a photo of yourself that didn't match your idealized image, that wound reopened. Until now. Because now you know better. You know that your pain wasn't vanity, it was history. Your reaction wasn't shallowness, it was memory. You were looking at a wound, not a flaw. And now that you've seen it clearly, you can heal it. And healing doesn't always look like glowing skin and perfect lighting. Sometimes healing looks like crying over an old photo and finally saying, "I forgive you." Sometimes it looks like printing a photo you used to hate and placing it somewhere visible as a reminder that you've outgrown the shame. Sometimes it looks like sitting in front of a camera with nothing to prove and everything to feel and letting yourself just be. Because this work isn't about becoming more photogenic, it's about becoming more whole. It's about no longer being hijacked by every captured moment that doesn't meet some arbitrary standard. It's about living with the kind of grounded self-respect that doesn't need to be framed. It radiates. It walks into a room before you say a word, and it remains even after you leave. That's the power of integration. That's the gift of making peace with your image, and not just the curated, filtered one, but the real one, the one that carries your story in its lines, the one that holds your grief in its gaze, the one that survived more than words can say. That image is sacred. That image is yours. And that image, when finally embraced, becomes your liberation. Because in the end, the goal isn't to create the perfect photograph. It's to live a life where every photo, no matter how raw, feels like a reflection of someone who is no longer at war with themselves. Someone who has chosen truth over illusion. Someone who has stopped hiding. Someone who has returned home. And perhaps this is the part no one tells you. The moment you stop trying to appear perfect is the moment you start to embody real beauty. Not the kind of beauty that conforms or pleases or impresses, but the kind that disarms, the kind that opens, the kind that lingers in the room long after the photo is taken, because that kind of beauty is not about symmetry or angles or curated lighting. It's about truth. And truth, when fully allowed to live in your face, your eyes, your posture, is unforgettable. It's magnetic. It's the kind of beauty that can't be manufactured, because it comes from integration. And integration is what Carl Jung was pointing to all along. The work isn't to eliminate what's ugly, awkward, or uncomfortable. It's to accept that those things were never the problem. The problem was the exile, the internal split, the decades of pretending that certain parts of you didn't exist or weren't worthy of being seen, the shame that forced you to edit your soul to fit into a frame. You've probably never been told this directly, but I'll say it now. Every single photo you've ever hated might be the exact place your healing begins. Not because you need to love the image, not because you need to frame it, but because your reaction to it is data, sacred psychological data, a trail of breadcrumbs that leads directly to the parts of you that are still asking for inclusion. And if you're willing to follow that trail, to pause when you want to flinch, to breathe when you want to scroll past or delete it, you might begin to notice something extraordinary. Not how you look, but how you've been looking at yourself. Through whose lens? Through whose eyes? With whose standards? And what if you let those questions guide you back to a more original relationship with your reflection? One not shaped by cultural comparison, but by compassion. One not fueled by insecurity, but by inquiry. One rooted not in aesthetics, but in soul. It is astonishing what shifts when we start to ask better questions. When instead of saying, "Why do I look so uncomfortable?" we ask, "What am I protecting in this image?" Instead of, "Why do I hate this photo?" we ask, "What part of me was scared of being seen here?" Because that shift, from judgment to curiosity, from shame to insight, is what transforms photos from threats into teachers. You no longer need to brace yourself before looking. You don't need to rehearse a self-image before showing up. You just become present. And presence doesn't require perfection. It requires integration. It asks you to stop performing wholeness and start practicing it, moment by moment, image by image, breath by breath. And what's remarkable is how quickly your nervous system begins to respond. When you stop attacking your image, your body relaxes. When you stop bracing against your reflection, your energy softens. Your eyes become steadier. Your breath deepens. You stop living in anticipation of critique and start inhabiting a quiet kind of self-acceptance, not the loud performative kind that insists I love myself while still shrinking inside, but the quiet, settled kind that no longer needs to prove anything. The kind that doesn't over-explain, doesn't seek approval, doesn't panic when seen clearly. That's what individuation feels like. It's not flashy, it's not Instagrammable, but it's real, and it radiates. Imagine walking into a room and being able to meet every gaze without flinching, not because you think you're flawless, but because you no longer feel like a fraud. Imagine seeing an unfiltered photo of yourself and not spiraling, but smiling. Not out of vanity, but out of recognition. You know this person. You've met them in the quiet. You've sat with them in the dark. You've listened to their fears, their longing, their exhaustion. You've walked with them through the fire of becoming, and because of that, you no longer need to hide them. That's what a photo becomes, then, not a test, not a performance, but a mirror, one that doesn't lie, one that doesn't flatter, one that simply reflects the sacred truth, you are here, you are home. That's what the shadow teaches us when we're brave enough to stop running. It reveals the brilliance beneath the shame, the freedom beneath the fear, the soul beneath the mask. And once you've tasted that freedom, you'll never again settle for performing aliveness. You'll want the real thing. You'll crave the weight of your full presence. You'll start moving differently, speaking differently, showing up differently. Not to impress, but to connect, to inhabit, to take up your rightful space without apology. And that's the deepest irony of all. When you stop obsessing over how you appear, people begin to truly see you. Not the edited version, not the aesthetic curation, but the essence. And essence is unforgettable. It doesn't age, it doesn't fade, it doesn't depend on angles or filters. It transcends the physical. Because it is spiritual. It's the echo of your wholeness. The vibration of someone who has integrated enough of their shadow to stop being reactive and start being rooted. Someone who no longer contorts to avoid rejection. Someone who has befriended their darkness and now carries a quiet light. The kind of light that doesn't scream for attention but demands it all the same, through stillness, through steadiness, through presence. So maybe the next time you come across a photo of yourself that makes you flinch, you can pause, not to critique, but to listen, to ask, what part of me is asking to come home? What emotion is trying to speak through this image? What truth have I been too afraid to see in myself? And if you're willing to sit with those questions, to breathe through the discomfort, to drop the judgment and lean into the curiosity, you'll begin to heal something that no camera could ever capture. Your relationship to being seen, not just visually, but emotionally, energetically, spiritually. Because at the end of the day, this work, this journey through the lens, the reflection, the shadow, it's not about photos at all. It's about freedom. The freedom to be fully you, unmasked, unfiltered, unapologetic. And the truth is, the camera was never the enemy. The enemy was the illusion that you had to become someone else just to be worthy of being seen. But you don't, you never did. And every photo that made you doubt that, every image that made you shrink, every pixel that triggered your shame was not proof that you were flawed. It was proof that your soul was ready to be reclaimed. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most powerful message a photograph can offer. Not as a judgment, but as a mirror, a living, breathing symbol of the parts of you that are still waiting for your permission to exist, not in secret, not in the shadows, but in the full light of awareness. Because the parts of you that feel the ugliest, the most unworthy, the most unbearable to look at, those are often the very pieces of your soul that got abandoned in childhood. Not because you wanted to reject them, but because somewhere along the line someone made you believe they were too much, too raw, too inconvenient, and in order to survive you made a deal. You promised not to show those parts anymore. You promised to smile, to pose, to fit the mold. And you did. You learned to perform just enough vulnerability to be liked, but not enough to be truly known. You built a persona that looked put together, charismatic, maybe even admirable, but it was not completely. And so now every time you see a photo that catches you off guard, the deal you made with yourself begins to crack. The mask slips, the old narrative stutters, and the self you buried rises to the surface for a moment, confused, exposed, wondering if this time it's safe to be seen. That's what the discomfort is. That's why the photo hurts. It's not about the angle, it's about the fracture. The distance between who you appear to be and who you truly are. And Jung knew this better than anyone, that what we repress doesn't die, it waits. And it returns through emotion, through dreams, through projections, and yes, through photographs. You can't outrun it. You can't curate your way around it. Because your shadow wants one thing, integration. Not rejection, not performance, integration. And until you give it that, it will keep showing up in the places you least expect, in your relationships, in your anxieties, in your reflection. But the moment you stop pushing it away, something incredible happens. The image that once made you cringe becomes neutral, then familiar, then tender, and eventually sacred. Not because it changed, but because you did. Because instead of seeing that photo as a threat to your ego, you began to see it as a message from your unconscious, a quiet signal saying, I'm still here, I still matter, will you make room for me? And when you do, when you finally say yes, you don't just heal your relationship with the photo, you heal your relationship with yourself. That's when your energy shifts. That's when your nervous system stops bracing. That's when you walk into a room with nothing to prove, because you're not trying to be accepted anymore. You've already accepted yourself, and in that acceptance you radiate something people can't quite name but always feel. It's presence. It's wholeness. It's the deep, quiet power of someone who has faced themselves and chosen love anyway, and it's unforgettable, not because it's loud, not because it's flashy, but because it's rare. Those people are still hiding, still performing, still looking at themselves through the lens of "am I good enough?" instead of "is this true?" And that's why your authenticity becomes a kind of revolution. It disrupts the narrative. It refuses to participate in the performance. It tells the truth in a world addicted to illusion, and in doing so it invites others to do the same. Your integration becomes contagious. Your wholeness becomes a mirror that reflects back what others are still searching for in themselves. That is the spiritual ripple effect of self-acceptance. It doesn't just liberate you, it liberates others. So maybe, from this moment forward, you can choose a new relationship with your image, one that isn't based on control or fear or shame, but on understanding, one that recognizes that every expression, every wrinkle, every flicker of discomfort has something to teach you, that your eyes, no matter how tired, still hold wisdom, that your face, no matter how imperfect, still carries beauty, that your body, no matter how it moves or rests, still deserves to be seen, and not just by others, but by you, because that is the healing we're really chasing, not the perfect picture, but the reclaimed presence, the peace that comes from no longer needing to edit your existence just to be worthy. This isn't the kind of healing that shows up in before and after photos. It's slower, quieter, more sacred. It's the kind of healing you feel in your bones. The kind that softens your face even when you're alone. The kind that lets you meet your own reflection without flinching. The kind that turns even your most unflattering photo into a relic of your return. A timestamp of when you stopped performing and started remembering. Remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. Remembering the softness in your eyes before they learned to shield. Remembering the innocence in your expression before it was taught to conform. Remembering that you were never broken, just buried. So if you take nothing else from this, take this. Every photo is a portal. Every discomfort is a guide. Every judgment is an invitation. And the ones that sting the most, they hold the key. The key to the version of you that's still waiting in the shadows, still wondering if they're welcome. And you get to be the one who answers, who makes space, who says, "Yes, I see you now. You belong here too." That's what real transformation looks like. That's how you stop fearing your own face. That's how you stop flinching at your own light. And that's how you begin to live, not for the camera, not for the world, but for the truth of who you really are.